Alrighty, so we finished our really fancy display boards for the holidays, so that way our food looks extra delicious, even though your cooking sucks. Let's figure out how we finish it and make it look its absolute best. We're gonna try a few different methods and see which one works best for us. Your mileage may vary, but let's figure it out. Let's get to it. Alright, so what we've got here is some river display boards. They could be used as somewhat of a cutting board. I wouldn't really recommend it though. But anyway, they're really cool to put food and stuff on. We made these a couple days ago. The epoxy's been drying for about 3 or 4 days now. It should be nice and hard, ready to be planed. We've got a few different ones. We've got some, honestly, I don't know what this is. My wood guy kind of just gave it to me. He's like, hey, this looks cool, take it. We've also got some just cool, good old-fashioned cedar that we actually chopped down in our backyard, which if you want to learn how to chop down a tree, find a different YouTube channel because I'm not the expert and I'm not going to tell you how to chop down a tree. Anyway, but they're pretty cool. It's just some basic tabletop epoxy that we poured in the center. We got a couple slabs, chopped them, all the river stuff. If you want to learn how to make river cutting boards, cutting tables, all that fun stuff, check out other videos. We walk you through how to do exactly just that. So actually what's really cool is we made these molds. A lot of people make molds out of, I don't know, it's like a PVC board or something. I don't know, they use Tyvek tape, but it still sticks. And then you can put a mold release on it, which does help, but I found this method to be a lot better, is just making a simple mold and then putting some plastic down, and that's it. Yes, you're gonna get this ugly bottom, but we're gonna plane that anyway, so it really doesn't matter. So that just saved me 20 minutes of fighting and cursing at it. So let's actually just get these out of the mold and then we'll go to the next step. Alrighty, so the first one up is this purple one. This is actually for a client. They specifically ordered a cheese board and they wanted an LSU purple, which we are going to do. And actually later today, I'm going to show you how to engrave these things, which is kind of cool with just a cheap $200 laser. But first things first, so if you see on our little molds, now I know if you'd have taken your time and really made a really good mold and spent 2 hours doing it, you'd already had this perfectly, it would be a perfect square already. But if you want to do these fast and efficient, you just kind of make a mold and silicone it, which all I'm going to do is I made this actual board about 5 inches too big. So what I'm going to do is just go over to the saw over here and just simply cut a line, and that'll make my line super straight. So let's do that real quick. Alrighty, so as you can see, it's straight. There's really no need to make a perfect mold unless you're just super OCD about everything and you really want to make a perfect mold, but cool. But I got it pretty straight and it's fine for our purposes. Now you're probably wondering, well, how do we get it flat? Don't worry, we're gonna get there. And there's a few different ways that we can do this. One way is we can use a typical router sled, which is just a mechanism that just basically takes a router and a flattening bit and you just go back and forth, and it flattens it. It's pretty easy. But since this is quite small, it can actually fit into what's called a planer. And all that does is it just planes the top and takes off just a little bit of material at a time and eventually does the whole thing and gets it pretty much, it gets it perfectly flat. And that's actually the method we're gonna do today. Now for a bigger table, like a huge river table, we would have to sled that or put it on our CNC machine. But since it's something this small, we're just gonna stick it through our planer, which, well, let's do it right now. So this is what is called a planer. Now, this is not the most expensive planer. Actually, this is probably a cheaper planer, which we have more expensive planers over there, but we're not gonna show you those. That's a whole nother video for a different day. This is just a cheap planer you can pick up at Lowe's. It's like 300 bucks. It'll get the job done. It'll simply just take your either really bad wood that's got a lot of waves in it and it'll make it flat, or in this case, it'll actually take off this kind of dip where the epoxy is right here, and we'll get rid of that, basically in 3 minutes or less. So it's pretty easy. All we're gonna do, well, first off, we're gonna do the back side. Since this side is relatively kind of flat, we're gonna go with the epoxy side since it kind of leaked out a little bit. That's because we didn't use enough silicone, but that's okay. We're gonna get it taken care of, so we're simply going to raise up everything and kind of where it sort of fits in there. Let's turn on the vacuum pump. Turn that on. Kind of feel, it's all about feel. Simply turn on the machine. So no, it's not magic, but it's pretty close. You can see that I got pretty much everything off within, I don't know, a minute or less. Actually, it wasn't even a minute, it was like 30 seconds. And now what we're gonna do is we're gonna do this a few times. It's still got a little bit of residue or a little bit of epoxy left over on the back side of the board. We're just gonna run it through a few times, just taking off a little bit of material at a time. That way we get it perfectly flat, and then we'll move on to our next step. So let's do it. Alright, so it's really that easy. We put this in, I don't know, 5 or 6 times, and it eventually got it pretty much flat. Now, as you can see, that's kind of, well, if you could feel, if you put your hand through the screen right there, the planer left some lines, which is pretty common, especially if you've got a kind of a cheap planer like this one. All it is just the blades being kind of imperfect and having little divots in them, and it just kind of creates these lines. But that's okay. If you've got a really expensive planer, it's probably not going to do this. But if you've got a cheap planer like me, it's going to leave some lines. But that's okay. We're going to do our next thing, which is just basically sanding it. We're going to take a few grits of sandpaper. We're going to start out at 120, and then we're going to work our way up to maybe like 300 or so. And then I'll get rid of all these lines and imperfections and make this thing baby butt smooth. So let's do it. So I've got my sander, sandpaper, and board, and you may be thinking like that doesn't look like a very expensive sander. Well, it's not. It's actually like a $20 sander from Walmart, and it gets the job done just fine. And we've actually got some cheap sandpaper that we got on Amazon, a box of like 500 for like 15 bucks. You don't need the expensive stuff to do this. Don't let other people fool you. You can use the cheap stuff and get just as good as a result as I do. Now, yes, if you use the expensive stuff, it may turn out a little bit better, but like I said, for our purposes, it'll be just fine. So let's get sanding. So I've actually just got to kind of work it. The key to sanding with this kind of stuff is just to keep it moving, because it's an orbital sander, so it's kind of vibrating and spinning at the same time. So we just got to keep working it into the wood. Now we don't want to dig. We actually don't want to like move the sander at a diagonal direction. We don't want to dig. We just need to always keep it flat on the board and just continue to sand. Now see, if you'll notice over here, if the camera wants to get a little closer, you'll see these lines right here, and you can actually feel them if you were here, but if we just continue to move our sander right over it, and these lines are all throughout the board, you just continue just to work it. And you'll notice they go away, so it's really not that bad. Just takes a little bit extra sanding, and it's good. So we'll just do this for a couple minutes, and it's pretty easy. So now that we have all of our boards nice and sanded down, I actually sanded a few more off camera. That way we can actually do 3 types of finishes real quick. So now it's time to finish. So what are we gonna do to finish these? Well, there's a few of them, and we're gonna actually order them in like easiest to like hardest, but then it's a little weird, and then it's like no maintenance, some maintenance, a lot of maintenance. But the first one being the easiest, but it takes a lot to maintain the board, is just good old butcher block oil. It's pretty easy, it's food safe, nothing to it, gives a good shine. You have to wipe on, wipe off, and then every couple months you have to reapply the same coating. Next is just good old, like, I don't know, polyurethane. What's good about it is it's shiny, protects it, but it scratches pretty easy, and then you also have to kind of, reapply this stuff every now and then. It's not the best, but it works. It's kind of cool, looks good. And then my favorite is epoxy. This stuff will make it look completely awesome, but it's kind of a pain in the butt to apply, especially if you're new to it. Don't let it intimidate you. It's actually pretty easy to do. And it also requires no maintenance once it's all set up and done. It gives it that perfect finish every single time, but the downside is if you do mess it up, it's kind of done. So let's start with our first one, which is the oil. Now it's pretty easy, so if camera wants to come here a little closer. This one we're actually just gonna do an oil finish. Actually, you know what? Or not. We're gonna do an oil finish on the purple one. Okay, it's pretty easy. So first we need to make sure it's all nice and clean. And all we're going to do is simply get a little bit of this stuff. Now I like to pour it on there. A lot of people are like, no, that's really bad. If you pour it on the epoxy part, It's actually not that bad. Just kind of slowly pour it on. You can already kind of tell it's already shining it up super well. And you just wipe on, and that's it. You just got to make sure you cover the entire surface with oil. And actually what's good about using oil, or at least butcher block oil, is it conditions the wood, keeps it moist, keeps it healthy, should never rot on you as long as you actually maintain these things. And then that's that easy. You just do this to all 4 sides. And what's good about this method as well is that it's super quick. Like, it takes 5 minutes, you can touch it pretty much instantly, and there's no mess. It's just easy. It doesn't take a lot of oil. Just simply wipe it on and smear it around until it's nice and coated, and it shines that block up really nice. Now, it's not going to give you a glass finish, but I like this. It's probably my favorite method. It doesn't glass it. It's not super shiny. It's kind of matte-ish. It's just kind of hard. But it's just an oil finish. You can do this for any block, any cutting board, and actually any wood, any kind of furniture you make. You can technically finish it with just some butcher block oil. And that's it. That block, or that food serving board, is complete. Nothing to it. It's nice and shiny. And usually all of our boards that we do sell come like this. Now, we do have a few requests, so every now and then we get a request for like shiny stuff, and somebody wants a polyurethane. So this next one, we're actually going to do a urethane. Okay, so, all right, so this one we're actually going to do some polyurethane. I'm actually going to oil it first. It just brings out some of that color, because sometimes that polyurethane really doesn't bring out the color. It just kind of protects it. So I'm kind of want to bring this color out just a little bit. And I'm almost out of oil, which kind of sucks. But I don't need that much. Dang. It looked like there was a lot left in here, but I guess there was not. Now we're just going to do one side, because obviously you have to do both sides and you can't flip it until it is dry. So let me get this side nice and coated. Okay. Alrighty, so we got that coated. Now you should be doing this in a relatively clean environment, obviously, but we're outside, it's clean enough. Not really anything that we care about at the moment. This is a big river table we're working on, but if we get a little urethane on top of it, we still have to plane it down anyway, so it's fine. So we're just gonna take some of this. You can buy this at Lowe's, Home Depot, and we're just gonna spray it on. Got to give it a good fat before you do it. And then just lightly spray it on. Now it's going to take a couple coats, because this wood's just going to drink it like an alcoholic. It's just like spraying paint. Just need to get good even coverage. Like I said, we'll do this a few times. Like I said, you probably want to do this in like a cleaner area, or one that's you don't really have anything valuable around, which we're at a big shop, so it's kind of fine. And there we go. And it's that easy. It does give it a nice good shine. Once it does dry, it should dry pretty much like this. And it's already soaking it up. And that's a good way to keep a good protective finish on this. That way it lasts for a really long time. So let's move on to my favorite one, which is epoxy. Now for our last finish, we're actually going to do some tabletop epoxy, which is actually my favorite kind of finish. Takes a little of time to cure. You don't get to touch it right away, but that's okay. The best finishes usually take the longest. So you can get some of this Not everywhere. This is a specialty order. We got this one online, but you can also get tabletop epoxy at Sherwin-Williams. So if you go into their store, they should actually carry some, which I wish I had a box to show you, but we just used it all. This stuff I got online. It's pretty cheap. It's roughly 60 bucks a gallon. These are 2-gallon kits, so they're about 120 bucks. Sometimes they have sales. We actually had a Black Friday sale not too long ago, and I got 20 gallons for around 650 bucks. Anyway, it's a 2-part epoxy, meaning we have 1 part resin, 1 part hardener, so it's the same amount for each one. Now some epoxies they do like 3-to-1, which means 3 parts epoxy to 1 part resin. So what we're going to do in those kind of epoxies are usually thicker epoxies. This stuff is just tabletop, so you can't really pour that much. Now if it's cold outside, fun fact, just like it is today, you can actually pour a little bit thicker than normal because the chemical reaction, what it's doing is it's putting off a lot of heat, and what causes cracks is that heat. Well, if it's cold outside and you have enough epoxy, you can pour thicker, maybe. Do it at your own risk, but just a fun fact. Anyway, so what we're gonna do, this is an old mixer. It's dry, it's clean, it's fine. So we're gonna go ahead and pour. I only need for that board maybe 16 ounces. And just like I said earlier, if you have any leftover epoxy, we can simply just put it in one of those molds and make something out of it. So we're gonna put 16 ounces. So I'm gonna measure 8 ounces of resin. And it's really important that we try to get the same exact measurement for resin to hardener, because if we have too much resin, not enough hardener, it's going to take either a really long time to harden or it's not going to harden at all, and that's no bueno. Or if we have too much hardener, then it's going to harden really fast, which sometimes is fine, but it could crack it, and we don't really want to do that for something that we just finished. So we're going to do 16 ounces total. Now if we were doing like you know, a table or a river board or something, you could actually add dye to this, and this would be the time you would add your dye, but since we're just doing a clear coat, no dye. So we're gonna take our mixer, which, let's get our lights out of the way so they're not bonking us in the head. Anyway, take our mixer, it's just a paint mixer, and we're just simply going to swirl it. Now if you notice in here, it's kind of muggy. It turns like this, you know, opaque white. We want to keep stirring until that turns relatively clear, which for something that's this small, it actually shouldn't take that long. You can already see that it's already starting to actually clear up. So it should be ready to pour here in about 20 seconds or so. See, it's actually getting really clear. And it's turning like glass. You can actually see the bottom. So we're just about ready to go. Now, really important that we don't overstir this. If you overstir it, it's going to introduce a lot of bubbles, which you'll never be able to get out if there's that many bubbles, especially if it's cold. Because when it's cold, this stuff is thicker and bubbles don't want to come out as easy. So there we go, got all that. And it's really important not to make a mess either. So have a bucket ready, that way you can get all of it on the side. And then we'll just let that drip in there for right now. Another key component of doing this is you need a source of heat. You do this with either a propane torch like this, get these at Lowe's, 30 bucks, or you can use a heat gun, does the same thing. So it's also really, really important that we make sure this thing is completely level. That way the epoxy doesn't run to one side or the other. If it's unlevel, say for instance if we have borders around this thing, it would puddle up over here and it wouldn't cover anything over there. So we want to make sure this thing is relatively level. So it actually needs to be adjusted just a hair. Alrighty, so we've got level the other way. Now we need to check levelness this way, which is pretty much there, but probably wedge a little something something. That looks perfect that way, and that looks perfect that way. It's really important that we make sure this area is actually absolutely clean. We don't want any kind of epoxy in this. So we'll grab our rag that we used a while ago. It's really important that we suspend this because the epoxy is actually going to drip over. We want to make sure your area is completely covered because this stuff does not come off once it is stuck. Very hard to get off. So now we'll simply just pour it on top. And you can already see that it just basically makes a glass coat. Don't want to pour too much because what it's going to do is it's going to self-level. You just want to pour just enough. And now over time, it'll kind of run. It's not going to like just pour, but it's going to level itself. That's just the nature of this liquid. It's not really how they design that. It's just based on the viscosity and how gravity works. It just wants to level itself. So we're just going to pour a little more. And it's okay to actually pour these little like hoops like this because it actually, see, it's actually like it kind of pulls itself in. So you just kind of want to for these areas over here. Fire, and you get all those air bubbles out. This will actually help it flow a lot better too, because it'll actually put some heat into it. Yeah, so if you can see me, but just me putting some heat onto it, it's wanting to flow a lot better. And it'll help us get these last few edges covered. Well, that's pretty much it. Like I said, there's 3 popular ways of finishing these things. It's the oil, which is my favorite, and I think it looks the best. It's nothing too flashy, and it shows off that nice food that you just prepared quite well. There's the polyurethane, which I don't honestly think is really that great. It's cool, but it's whatever. My second love is the epoxy. It's really flashy, it does look really cool, but it also does take a little bit of experience to work with this stuff, and it takes some patience. Get all the air bubbles out, pour it, level it, make sure it's all nice and good to go. And if it does mess up, or if something gets in this epoxy while it dries, like a bug, dust, and it dries with it in it, you're pretty much SOL and have to start over. It's not the end of the world, especially if you do pour it thick. You can technically buff it out, but then that becomes a lot more work and a lot more headache than I think it's worth. But if you can get lucky with these things and they don't, nothing messes up on them, they actually do look really well. But that's it for this video. If you do like this video, please like, subscribe, all that fun stuff. And if you have any suggestions for future videos, please drop a comment. So later, guys.